On this week's show, special guest host Scott and I chat about a few of the ways Bangkok has changed us over the years.
So if you're planning on being here any longer than a few weeks, you'll get some good insight on this episode of the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee Krab, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who was framed for illegal moose wrangling and escaped to Thailand, which has a non-extradition treaty for moose-related crime.
And I am guest host Scott Coates, also Canadian, and way back in 1999, I had way too much maple syrup with my breakfast and then dessert, passed out from having too much of it, woke up in Thailand, and I've been here pretty much ever since. And as we normally do, let's begin with a huge thanks to our supporters on Patreon, who we lovingly call patrons. Their generosity helps keep the show going ad-free, and in return, they get early access to each episode, gifts, goodies, and cool swag that's not available to regular listeners.
That's right, and of course, patrons also get a weekly, uncensored, unscripted bonus episode where we talk about all kinds of stuff. Ed and I just finished recording this week's bonus show, and we chatted about another terrible traffic statistic for Thailand and some of the solutions we think might help based on the stuff that we saw and the training that we went through when we were but wee lads back in our respective home countries. Mm-hmm. So you may have noticed that Ed is not with us this week, but not to worry, he'll be back next week. But in his place, I am joined by my very good friend Scott from the Talk Travel Asia podcast. Scott, let's go way back here. How did you and I meet in Thailand here?
I think we met in 2000 because I moved here in September 1999 with a friend, and we started what is now Thailand's premier luxury travel company, Smiling Albino. And after being here about a year, I went back to my home city at that time, Calgary, Canada, and put on a travel show at a bar. We got some media to come because we were trying to launch this company. And you were one of about 60 people who came to that travel show that night at that bar. And I remember you seemed much, much taller than me. And you told me, yeah, I'm going to come in 1 year on one of your trips. And I remember just thinking, this guy's not going to come on a trip in a year. And it happened.
Yeah, that was actually July 2001 when I came on the trip. And
right.
You were actually the second person I ever met in Bangkok. The first one being your then co-partner of Smiling Albino, Dan, who's still running the company and running very successfully.
Correct.
And you and Dan took me and my friend and a few other people on this amazing 8-day journey in Thailand and Bangkok and up north on motorcycles and into the Golden Triangle. And I had such a great time. It was really a big reason. You and Dan were really a big reason why I decided to stay. Running out of money and not having another option to get out of the country was another big one. But also, I mean, you're sort of responsible for me sort of kind of falling in love with Thailand.
Well, thanks. That's awfully nice. And it is crazy how, random meetings and things can lead to lifelong friendships. You're now one of my best friends in the world and certainly one of my top friends here in Bangkok. And it all started by you coming to one of our travel shows when we were just really brand new. So it's pretty cool. And I feel honored to call you a friend and be a guest host on this episode and actually a fan of your show. I just listened to an episode jogging home tonight.
Sweet. Serendipity, baby. Well, yeah, I'm glad to have you on. And like I mentioned, you also host you co-host your own podcast. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I do it with a recording partner, Trevor Ranges. Also lived here, I think, about 16, 17 years. Famous for writing Fodor's and National Geographic travel books on Thailand and Cambodia. We're old friends. And probably, I think about 3 years ago, we just wanted to make sure we stayed connected to travel. And we started this podcast, which we do an episode every 2 weeks. And we got talking, you and I, and we're like, hey, a little bit like wife swapping, but not nearly as personal or dirty. Let's do a host swap. And so sometime around now, when this is up, if you go to talktravelasia.com, your co-host, Ed is doing an episode with Trevor. So we're doing a full-on swap here, and it's kind of exciting because I get to see how the sausages are made on your end, behind the scenes. And again, as a fan of your show, it's fun to contribute.
Yeah, and it's really cool because our two podcasts are quite different. Like, we're sort of focused only on Bangkok, and you guys talk to some really cool people all over Asia and the region, focused on travel, and it's a really cool sort of coverage of this life in this area, life in the big city. And then what a lot of people also love taking advantage of is the easy travel opportunities here too. You can head over to Vietnam, or you can go down to Malaysia, or up to wherever. So it's a great listening to your podcast too. So patrons and regular listeners, head over to Talk Travel Asia and check it out. It's a really good podcast. So now there was this one, Scott's podcast. That's about all you need, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you put these two together, and I think you're covered. But yours certainly has a bigger audience than ours. But thanks for those kind words. And we do welcome you to come over and have a listen. So, Greg, you and I batted around a number of ideas for this one. I think because we've known each other so long, lived here a long time, maybe, at least for me, I was maybe a little over-concerned as to what the topic should be to make sure it's like the perfect topic. And I think we've landed on something pretty decent.
Yeah, it's going to be our bromance. No, just kidding. It's not going to be about anything about a bromance. But you and I sometimes get together over beers and we chat about just, the big questions in life, the who, what, when, why of it all. And we thought that maybe it'd be cool to talk a little bit about, as two guys who have been here for so long, who are not leaving in the foreseeable future, how we have changed, how Bangkok changes you as a person. Because I think Ed and I were talking on a previous show about how I would estimate the average turnover rate here for most foreigners is between 3 and 5 years. Let's say 4 years. I think after 4 years, people leave before they've been changed, but they haven't really their DNA hasn't been altered. But when I look at myself, I'm a completely different person than I was when I first came here.
Yeah, there's a couple parts to it, I think. Number one, we should try and find out the stat, like what is the average expat life here lengthwise. I've heard that 7 years, kind of like quitting a job or leaving a marriage, is when a lot of people decide, like, I'm in for the long haul, or they leave. And for me, I kind of wonder, like, how much of how I've changed is because I've been here so long, and how much of it is because I'm almost 45 and I moved here at 26. Because, I mean, as we know, you change with age and you get wiser and you learn things. So I think for me, it's maybe a bit of a balance. But everything I'm going to highlight today is definitely a result of living here.
Dude, 26. I still can't.
Yeah.
I still can't believe I came over here when I was 26 too. I was a punk.
Yeah. 10 kilos lighter, a lot more handsome, single, and but hey, life is fantastic. I love it.
But I have the same amount of hair, so that evens out.
You do. Yeah, I have a little less.
Well, let me go first then. So we each wrote down a few points here, and the first one I wanted to talk about how Bangkok has really changed me is that living here has really let me experience life as a minority, and how that gives you a lot of empathy for how immigrants to our home countries experience it, and language difficulties. You stand out in crowds, people gossip about you, and occasionally outright discrimination. So I think that's a really important part about living anywhere other than your home country, but especially about Bangkok, because there's a special word for foreigners here, farang, and it's really interesting being an outsider in that way.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's different about living here as a foreigner, and it would be the same if you lived in Ho Chi Minh City or Beijing, is that where we come from, Canada, it's a country of immigrants. So if somebody was Thai walking down the street in Vancouver, people would probably look at them and assume they're Canadian first and of Thai heritage second. Whereas it doesn't matter how well you speak Thai, or I know lots of Indian Thais, and they're like second, third generation, but they're always Indians first in Thai's eyes, right? So having the experience as a minority, when I read this one that you'd written down, I'm like, wow, what a great point, because it's been a good experience for me. I can't really think of too many times when I felt like somebody was screwing me over or treating me poorly as a foreigner. There's definitely been some times where I realized, you know what, they don't love us here quite as much as we think. Like, they may smile, and, the odd time someone gets a little annoyed. But I bet you if you took a Thai person and sent them to Canada for 18 years, as I've been here, they would definitely have had more stories of being treated poorly, even though Canada's great. And it really gave me I'd say after only about 5 years, I went back to Canada and I went into a convenience store. And often, it's somebody of Indian or Pakistani heritage, let's say, running a Mac store or something like that. And I never got it. And now I get it, because here they would just work that convenience store here for the rest of their life to get by.
Right.
If you move to Canada and you work 12 or 14 hours a day for a couple of years, you'll own the store and a house and a car and have a second or third store in a few years. So I have a totally new appreciation for immigrants now to Canada.
Yeah, and let's be honest, it's a little bit weird talking about life as a minority as two white men.
Yeah.
But one of our mutual friends, Derek, he said something really interesting the other day to me. He said he's looking forward to buying a car because he says as a foreigner in Thailand, it's really driving your car is the only time where you are completely in your own element, where people aren't looking at you or making judgments about you or pointing at you, where you're not standing out because no one can see you in your car. No one's, making assumptions about you. It's just you in your car and you blend in with all the other cars. And that's really hard to do when you're not in your car.
Yeah, it's tough for me to do on my motorbike, cutting between stop traffic on the way to work, because people are like, oh, that white guy doesn't know how to drive, probably.
Idiot.
Yeah. But that's a really solid point. And yeah, one I'm grateful for. It's definitely made me a better person.
Over to you. What's your point?
Yeah, my next one I think is like 50-50 living here, maybe 60-40. I think Thailand's had a bigger impact, but you've known me well. I'm still not super relaxed, and I can still get riled up kind of easy, but I would say overall I'm a much more relaxed person, and I think before I get visibly angry and raise my voice nowadays. And, I think as Westerners, it's almost part of our culture that if someone annoys you or you kind of get screwed over or something, it's okay to kind of raise your voice and get visibly annoyed and angry. Whereas in Thailand, that gets you absolutely nowhere. And you'll read it in, the first pages of any culture or travel book. And despite knowing it and reading it, I bet you it took me really a decade to really, truly believe it. And you realize, like, no matter how angry you are, how justified you think you might be at getting angry at someone or raising your voice, it will only have the opposite effect of what you're trying to achieve and make you look like a jerk by the end. So, I mean, there are still a couple places that will get me really angry, but in the first decade, I would get visibly angry and raise my voice in that like a Westerner, and I've learned to tone it down a fair bit, and I guess I'm still not Thai. I've come a long way, and I'll often kind of take a breath and think even for a few seconds before I react. And even sometimes when I know someone's kind of, having me on or they're lying to me or whatever, I'll just kind of, I'll think like Derek, the same guy you mentioned about the car. Years ago, we were walking into a bar and he said, out tie the ties, meaning like smile, put on a big smile. And so once in a while I'll be like, okay, out tie the ties. Like
that's a really good one. Derek's a wise man.
Yes, he is very wise about some things. Yeah, so out tie the ties sometimes. I'm still not great at it. Banks sometimes can make me lose my mind.
Don't even get me started about banks, man.
Yeah.
God.
But I would say overall, I'm sometimes, rather than, letting somebody know I'm annoyed or saying something back that'll let them know, like, I caught you, I'll just kind of give that Thai smile and let it roll, right? I'm like, I'll just let it go.
Yeah. Oh, man, my blood pressure spiked there when you mentioned Thai banks. But a lot of times, like walking into a Thai bank or a government office or something, I sometimes stand outside. I literally stand outside for a few minutes and be like,
serenity now.
Yeah, okay. This is going to be frustrating, but I got to let it roll off. I'll like water off a duck's back.
Very good.
That being said, I still do keep the old angry farang in my back pocket sometimes when I need to whip it out. Just, in the best case scenario, they'll just want to get rid of you as fast as possible. So
yeah, I kind of play it in that similar way, but almost I think more like the bad cop in a movie. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to totally lose my shit, but I'm going to kind of get a little more like I'll push a little harder than a local would.
Yeah.
Because I know everything is possible. And if you push a little harder often, you can get it done. So I do pull that card too sometimes.
Right. I'll finish this one off really with a really quick thing that I wrote for another thing that I was writing about culture. And this paragraph I wrote, it says, in his book, The Geography of Thought, How Asians and Westerners Think Differently and Why, Richard Nisbet says that Westerners see the world as stable, linear, mechanical place. Things work or should work in fairly predictable patterns, and when they don't, fixing it becomes job number one. Asians, on the other hand, see the world as complex, dynamic, always changing, It's mad, it's unpredictable, and you need to roll with the punches, brother, or you'll just end up tearing your hair out. So, it's an interesting observation.
Very. What do you have next on your list?
Well, I wrote down being slapped in the face with how lucky you actually are. Because in 2017, Oxfam rated Thailand as the third most unequal country in the world. And Ed and I have also talked about this on the show before, about how Bangkok is not Thailand. Bangkok is Bangkok.
Yeah, income disparity, right?
Yeah, huge. So when you get out of Bangkok, it's really important because it helps you see how the rest of the country lives, how social stratification works, and what is really important to people. Very poor Thais still laugh, they still raise families, and they still enjoy life. But you see how little people have, and how they're just getting on with their day too. And it's just, it really throws things into perspective. That's not purely a Thai thing, but it's something that you do see fairly readily as soon as you sort of step out of your comfort zone in Bangkok.
Yeah, it's been written about a lot, and I think there's a TV show or a movie about rich Asians, but like rich people you knew in Canada and rich people you know in Thailand are two different things. Like the rich person you know in Canada has a few $1 million and a couple BMWs, whereas the rich Thai you know has like hundreds of millions of dollars, or like they're super rich. But I had a slightly different take on your point, and it took me back to, probably that same time period I met you, my first Thai girlfriend, and Thailand was still really new and strange and weird to me, and I lived in the suburbs. Things were a fair bit rougher out there than where I live now, but I loved it, and I was still getting used to it. And there was some National Geographic show on about Kenya, and my girlfriend then didn't have much money, and I still kind of viewed Bangkok and Thailand as this really, kind of third world developing place. And the show on Kenya was downright sad and depressing. And in partway through, she sort of said, "Man, I'm really lucky to be from Thailand." And I kind of realized, I was like, yeah, you are, and I looked online at that time, and I think Thailand was somewhere around like 42nd most developed countries in the world, right? And you realize, like, wow, I mean, there's something like, let's say 200 countries in the world. That's not bad. And you know what? Like, you turn on the tap pretty much anywhere and pretty clean water comes out. The toilet flushes and works for the most part. Like, gather some holes in the sidewalk, but there are sidewalks. Most roads are paved. For that matter, you go out into the countryside and tertiary roads are in great condition. So I was like, yeah, you could be in a hell of a lot worse places. Like, Thailand is a second world developing country, and it is a great place to be. Like, many, many people from the world emigrate to Thailand.
Yeah, that's one thing that pisses me off is when people call Thailand a third world country. It's not a third world country. Mm-mm. It's a developing country by the United Nations standards.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's a really good one, Greg. Everyone you've hit on this spurred me on to be inspired as well.
Oh, wow. I'm inspiring someone. I'm happy. What's your next point?
I love here how in a single day you'll meet everybody from both ends of the financial and social spectrum. Like the first 13 years I lived here, I lived in the eastern suburbs, an area called Ramkhamhaeng, and it's a bit more rough and ready than where I live now in Asok, which is arguably kind of the center of the city. But so I used to do a lot of running out on the canals, which are generally through poorer neighborhoods there. But even downtown, I mean, in your day, you will have an interaction with someone selling food or someone doing some work or some labor that is poor. But they'll give you a smile. If you say hi and have a little chat, they're thrilled. At the same time, you're going to meet somebody who's worth a couple $100 million. And again, if you smile and you're nice to them, same thing, you'll have a good experience. But then what I really love is that, let's say you go to a good noodle stall on the side of the road, is you can get both of those people sitting down at the same table having a bowl of noodles because it's affordable, and Thais love good food. I mean, they'll drive, across the city for a famous bowl of street stall noodles. But Thais, even though they might not interact, those two people, they will sit at the same table. So I really love that, like, in my day-to-day life, I interact with and meet people from all ends of the financial and social spectrum. I just don't think that would happen in Canada.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think back to my life in Canada, although those many years ago, and it was, definitely middle class, but I never really strayed outside of that. I never went down to the poor parts of town. I never hung out with rich people. And so, yeah, that's that. I never really thought of that, but like you and I always say, one of our favorite places to eat in Bangkok is at Tuk Ledi in Foodland, the little food counters there, because
it's great.
Yeah, like everyone goes to Tuk Ledi, rich, poor, old, young, foreigners, Thais, and immigrants. So the city's great in that way, and it really gives you a very easy way to expand your horizons in terms of social structures. So that is a really cool part about it. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, Greg, take us to your last point.
Oh, my last one. I wrote down here, it's very simple. You realize just how strong you are. And I think I've told the story before. When I first came here, I came over here with my friend Mark. You remember Mark. We did this great trip with Smiling Albino and you and Daniel. And we were supposed to stay in Thailand for 4 months. And my friend Mark went home after 12 days. And he just didn't dig it. He loved the idea of traveling, but actually traveling and actually being in a strange country and trying to orient yourself, it is not easy. And it's especially difficult when you decide to live here by default or otherwise, in my case. You're in a new culture where you don't understand the language, you don't understand the religion, the politics, even something as simple as the dating rituals, which I'm still trying to figure out.
I hope not. You're married.
Well, let's say relationship rituals, not so much dating. But once you figure it out and you push through and you learn just how resourceful and strong you can be, simply because you really don't have any other choice. But so I think living here as an expat, and this doesn't apply specifically to Thailand, but you really do find out how strong you are and what kind of a person you are. And I think it's maybe a little bit easier here because Bangkok is such a great city because it's got those Western conveniences if you need to tap out for a few hours and go sit in a Starbucks or something. Mm-hmm. So, moving to a city like Bangkok, while it's not 100%, an alien world, it's still a different culture and a strange place. And if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. We've never heard that before.
Yeah, you're right about that because, I met a recent import here, and they were justifiably mystified. I guess like, wow, you've been here 18 years. And during our conversation, I got thinking about in my first couple of years meeting this guy that had been here 8. And I just remember, even though I came to start a business and had intentions of staying, I was like, whoa, 8 years. And getting through, for me, probably the first 7 years, there are highs and lows. And there's times like you're loving it, and then times where just everything drives you crazy. You can't stand how things work. And maybe, things just aren't going great, but like dramatic highs and lows. And it definitely makes you realize who you are and your strengths and your weaknesses. That said, though, we kind of mentioned at the beginning, like our worst case is still better than 95% of the world, because our worst case is we would move back to Canada and live in a basement suite apartment and work at Home Depot. And that's better than most of the world, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's something that I've actually thought about a lot, especially now that I have a kid. And as he gets older, one of the truths of life that I want to drill into his head is like, there are people in the world who would give everything they have for your problems. On your worst day, they would give everything they have your worst day. So yeah, it's all perspective.
Absolutely. We're very, very lucky.
Yeah, totally. So our last point is yours. Take it away.
Yeah, I love that it's not perfect here. I mean, something that I've been mesmerized with from day one until now is that there's a real beauty in things not being perfect. I love that the sidewalks have holes in them and the bricks kind of move around sometimes, or that, I can pay a police officer rather than getting a ticket. I can just, slide him a bit of money sometimes. I mean, I don't love seeing rats run across the sidewalk, but hey, that's life. And, sometimes people that are visiting will see street food and go, ooh, that looks dirty. But you know what? Like, this is a city with its old traditional heritage. It is developing. They're quirky, but that's what makes Bangkok great. Wandering an alley and being completely safe, drinking a beer while walking down the street or in an alley or alongside a canal, or just walking by a random stall and being like, hey, let's sit down and have a plate of food. To me, it's the organized chaos that really makes Bangkok so interesting and so much more exciting than places like Singapore or Kuala Lumpur. And I mean, I have great respect and admiration for what Singapore has accomplished, and my wife's from there and I enjoy my short visits in KL, but I actually don't like the complete sanitization and everything being perfect. So as a person, somehow it's changed me to actually appreciate maybe it reminds me that life isn't perfect. Life will never be perfect. Even if you go to Canada, one of the most developed places in the world, I will bet you if, there was two people having a podcast, they could find a million things to gripe about Canada. But I actually love the fact that it's not perfect. And I get a little sad when some of my old favorite spots, they'll be like renovated and made, quote unquote better or something. I'm like, now like some of the beauty's lost. So I really love that element of being here.
Well said, man. That was very eloquent. Yeah,
Thank you.
I agree. And, last night I walked down Soy Convent for the first time since all those restaurants, Molly Malone's, the sort of legendary pub, and all those other restaurants and street food and stuff like that is going to be booted out because they're going to build a huge new building on the corner there. And it's like, oh man, it's like, I like this Soy. It was dirty and grungy and crowded, and it pissed me off, people walking slowly, and I just squeezed between them and the bowl of pig intestines on the sidewalk. But yeah, I'm going to miss it, man. So yeah, I think that phrase organized chaos is what a lot of us appreciate about it here, because it's slightly unpredictable. You never really know what's going to happen, and as much as it annoys us, I think ultimately that's something that we really respect about this place. And a good point too. It kind of parallels life. Like, hey man, there's no rule book. You just got to make it up as you go and hope for the best. Yeah,
no, it's great. I love it, and I love it. Organized chaos, man. I'll stop there.
How do you say that in Thai? I don't get to put on a shirt.
I don't know. Don't put me in. I speak Thai reasonably well, but I don't know either of those words.
Organized chaos.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's roll on to everyone's favorite segment of the show, and that is Love, Loathe, or Leave, where one of us surprises the other with a particular aspect of living in Bangkok, which we then discuss and decide if it's something that we love about living here, loathe about living here, or hate so much that it makes us want to leave forever. And Scott, since you are the guest this week, I'm going to hand it over to you. Why don't you lay something on me?
You guys might have done this one, but it drives me bonkers. Like, I'm under no illusion that my Thai is perfect. It's far from perfect, but I speak it well enough for day-to-day things and getting around. And I find often Thais just can't wrap their heads around a foreigner speaking Thai. So, for instance, my wife's Singaporean. We'll go out and we'll have food, and I'll say, do the ordering. And the whole time I'm ordering and speaking to the waiter or waitress, he or she kind of keeps trying to look over at my wife, right?
Yeah.
And I'll even tell them, I'll be like, she's from Singapore, she doesn't speak Thai. And they're like, kind of nod, but they just keep going back to her. Or, for example, getting an Uber driver. When we had Uber here, our place is a little tricky to find. And I can definitely speak Thai well enough. And I would give them very specific instructions, and then they still wouldn't find it. They'd drive past the street. And I call them. I'm like, where are you? And why did you go down there? And he goes, well, I thought. I'm like, I told you to turn right back there. He goes, yeah, I know, but I thought, I know this. And you're like, no, like, just listen to what I'm saying. And I find often, or even in person, like, I've been saying something to someone, and you can tell they're just, maybe they're not used to the accent, but they're so floored with even, say, a dinner reservation. I had this happen, and the girl was kind of looking at me, and then she just turned to her colleague and like said, oh, can you talk to him? And he spoke to me in Thai, and I said the exact same thing, and no problem. So you're like, it just throws people off where you're like, if you just take a breath and
like throw me a bone here.
Yeah, like definitely it'll all work out. But yeah, that kind of gets my goat a bit sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. And I understand your pain with your wife, because one of my friends taught here for a year, and she's Chinese Canadian, born and raised in Canada, but her parents are from China. And we'd be out shopping, and I'd be speaking in Thai, and they'd be sort of like, it's almost like my words were going into like a buffer, and they weren't really, they were just sort of like pausing my voice for a minute while they waited for the Asian person to speak. And when she didn't, it was like, confusion.
Yeah, it amazes me and how it'll happen like 3-4 times in a meal. Like, I think of a restaurant, like you'll tell them like, oh, she doesn't speak Thai. And they're like, and then when they come back, they'll start speaking to her. And I'm like, no, speak with me. And it just, you can't get them out of it. It's so funny.
This goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the show, which is how if you're a person in Canada of any race, people will be like, this guy's Canadian. It's just he's, his ancestry is different than mine, perhaps. But no matter how fluent you are, I mean, like, I could be speaking 100% fluent, like native level. I could have a Thai passport. I could be a Thai citizen, and I would still be the Farang who speaks good Thai. So yeah, you're always sort of trying to get your foot in the door, no matter how far it's been in before.
Yeah, it is. It is funny. So I don't know who says first if they love, loathe, or leave it, you or me.
Well, it doesn't matter, but I loathe that. I mean, come on, like if you hear me speak Thai to you and you can obviously carry on a conversation, like I said, throw me a bone. That's just.
Yeah, I'm with you on the loathe. I mean, I'm certainly not going to leave, and it's just a quirk of living here. But I'm truly always amazed when you can tell them like straight out, she doesn't speak Thai, speak with me, or it's something so simple and clear, and they just don't want to listen. But hey, I mean, such are the marvels of living overseas, right?
It sometimes goes both the other way too. Like sometimes I'll be speaking Thai, and it's like my default thing when I'm talking to a Thai person is I try to muddle through it in Thai. And then every once in a while they'll be like, "You can speak English," or really good English. That's embarrassing. Like, my Thai momentum carries me. Like I continue speaking Thai for a little bit before I realize, like, oh, I'm just embarrassing myself.
Yeah, I've had that many, many, many times.
Yeah, no doubt.
If I think before we wrap it up here, we want to thank again the patrons who are listening right now. As everyone knows, you don't run ads here at the Bangkok Podcast. You just keep it free and easy and give like 2 episodes a week. If you're a Patreon subscriber, I mean, that's big. I do one every 2 weeks, and that's tough for me. So we really do appreciate the support we get from the patrons. And if you want to get in touch with us, it's great to follow at Bangkok Podcast on Facebook and Twitter. I follow you both, and sometimes I respond. I try and be nice all the time and smile and not get angry. Or you can send a message via the contact form on BangkokPodcast.com, where we're usually pretty good at getting back to you. Being nice helps.
Yeah, sure does. And you can also find us online, where we post each episode and carry on conversations with our listeners. And you can also reach out to me directly on Twitter if you'd like, where I am BKK Greg. So thank you for listening, everyone, and we will see you next week. Sawadee krab, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, who left Kanakistan.